The Civil War and the way that the states divided themselves, let's not kid ourselves, it was over slavery and the right to hold slaves. I'll read from the Virginia Ordinance of Secession for just that fact. The final clause here in the second paragraph says, the federal government, having perverted said powers, not only to the injury of the people of Virginia, but to the oppression of the southern slaveholding states. There are no other grievances mentioned in that ordinance of secession. Every other ordinance or article of secession by every other state that seceded includes slaveholding as a key determinant for their decision to secede. It truly is America's original sin. And I think it's time. And another reason, particularly within Idlewild, if you look around the street names, there are some that might just blend into the scenery and you don't notice them as much. But one to me that has always stood out and actually prompted me to do a little bit of research on my own is actually Jubal Early Drive. Now, I've studied the Civil War like everyone else here at some point in school, and I knew a lot of the generals' names, both on the Union side and the Confederate side, but I never heard the name Jubal Early. And so I started to look up who was Jubal Early, and sure enough, he was a Confederate general. Okay, fine in terms of another one, but I started to read a little bit more about him. You had generals like Robert E. Lee who, had this desire for reconciliation after the war, maybe even some of them going so far as to recognize the error of their ways. Jubal Early was the exact opposite. He spent the remainder of his life after the war toward white supremacy. That was his guiding light forever and always. And in fact, I'm going to read just one sentence of his because I think it portrays his mindset as well as any other. It's hard. Reason, common sense, true humanity to the black, as well as the safety of the white race, required that the inferior race should be kept in a state of subordination. That was his principle. That was what he believed deep in his soul. We cannot continue to honor these people by naming streets in our city after them. It has to stop. And I'm heartened, actually, by a letter that we received back on February 21st from our Memorials Commission. You may have noticed in that their February 16th meeting, they unanimously approved a resolution to rename Forest Avenue because it was named after Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the KKK. So this is not an isolated incident. It's not an isolated, quixotic journey of one of my neighbors. It is a growing movement and a growing recognition of people across the city that the time to honor Confederate generals, people who fought for the ability of Virginia and other states to hold slaves, that time should end, and it should end now.
As a council and a council member, I'm happy that when things hit the table, I already know it's going to be a discussion, right? I already know it, and we've been there on different issues, and I'm really pleased that somebody brought it to the table to discuss something that's real, and it almost makes me want to go back and say, well, who named these streets too? Because you have to go out of your way to do a Jubal Early. You have to, it's usually one name and then just to do the whole name. But I just want to say thank you. And I spent a lot of energy on, we all know some of these issues, but our kids are going to grow up in these neighborhoods. They're going to play on these streets, and it's feelings that come with where you're from. And you know, I'm just putting it out there. I can just imagine, you know, somebody learning later in life, you know, wait a minute, I grew up on that street or that street or that street, and it's going to be an odd, you know, it's going to be odd feelings or mixed feelings, I would say, towards that. So I just want to say thank you, and Mr. Graham, just thank you for bringing it to the table, because it's our duty. It's become the council's duty to address the issues, and I'm really happy I'm seriously happy just to be sitting here knowing that something will happen. I don't know what that, you know, what the end result is, Mayor Greenlaw, but just happy that we're able to have discussions.
I agree with the Vice Mayor that this is something that we need to take up. This is a discussion that we need to have in town. We've had hard conversations, and like you say, the idea, well, as Dr. Watkins said, the idea that it seems like a few years ago when Idlewild was built, that we weren't sensitive to that as a community. And it shows you just how fast things change, and I'm ready for that overdue change. Thank you.
One thing I think we should point out is, you know, moving forward on this, that slavery was in the South, yes, but by the way, Delaware was a slave state and remained loyal to the Union. The Emancipation Proclamation only made slavery illegal in those states currently in rebellion against the Union, because they didn't want to mess up Kentucky, they didn't want to mess up Delaware, they didn't want to go ahead and throw Maryland on the bus. And the presidential election of '68, on the Republican platform, the war is over, and the Republican platform says African-American suffrage, right to vote in the southern states, should be mandatory, but in the northern states, it should be granted on a state-by-state basis. So the issues that are pertaining to what we're talking about go well beyond just the South. It was a national issue at different degrees and levels, and it maintained that for a lot of years afterwards, and we need to recognize that. This is a conversation, and I've had this with some of my friends, obviously Civil War reenactor, friends on both sides and all this. Fredericksburg has a lot of history. Fredericksburg has had significant amounts of history since the Civil War. It is important, this community. It was a focal point of the war. But we've got a wall back here that signifies a number of individuals that have contributed to the city of Fredericksburg that have an equal right to be recognized by this community. And I've always said, I have voted and taken some votes against Martin Luther King bridges and things, not because I was against it, but I have this firm view that if you're going to name streets after events, name it after local people who are involved in it, because it's a lesson to generations to come that they have a role to play in these changes. So it is a conversation that is coming and has coming, and everything realize that. But it really does need to be a community conversation, not we're going to change everything overnight like we frankly did. We had a chance with Jeff Davis Highway in 2016 to have a community conversation. We didn't do it then, and then we found ourselves basically deciding as a council to immediately make a change. This conversation needs to be had, but it needs to be a very vibrant, inclusive community conversation. Because again, I firmly agree, there's people on that wall that should have streets named after them. But again, it's got to be the community involved in the entire conversation. Thank you.